The hall was bright with crystal lights hanging from the high ceiling, glowing in many colors. Long tables stretched across the room, filled with strange foods and drinks that smelled sharp and sweet. Alien nobles in shining clothes sat proudly, their eyes glowing in different shades, their laughter loud and cruel. In the middle of this great hall stood one human. He was alone, surrounded by hundreds of alien faces. His clothes were plain compared to theirs, his body small next to their tall frames, yet his back was straight and his eyes calm. The aliens looked at him as if he was an animal on display. Some pointed, others whispered, but most laughed openly. To them, he was not a guest but a joke. Their voices carried words like weak, primitive, and useless. Every word echoed through the grand chamber, yet the human did not flinch. He stood quietly, his face unreadable, and this silence only made them laugh more. One noble, his body covered in silver robes, raised a hand to quiet the room. His long fingers curled as he pointed toward a strange object placed on a stand. It was the Xenotone, an ancient instrument, glowing faintly with a soft blue light. No outsider had ever touched it, for it was considered sacred, a treasure of their people. The noble's lips curved into a mocking smile as he called out to the human, "If humans are not so primitive, then show us. Play the Xenotone for us." The hall erupted in cruel laughter. Many aliens clapped their hands, some pounding the table, their laughter booming like thunder. They expected the human to refuse, to tremble, or to embarrass himself with noise. This was their entertainment, their way of showing he did not belong among them. Even the queen, seated on a golden throne at the end of the hall, let out a soft laugh, her jeweled crown sparkling as she shook her head. "Let him try," she said in a voice that carried power. "We could use more amusement tonight." The human's eyes moved slowly toward the Xenotone. It was unlike any instrument he had ever seen. Its body was shaped from crystal and metal, with strings that shimmered as if made of light itself. It looked alive, pulsing faintly, almost as if it was breathing. He could feel its energy from where he stood, and he knew it was not an ordinary instrument. But he did not step back. Instead, he walked forward steady and calm, his footsteps echoing against the polished floor. Whispers spread quickly. "He dares? He cannot! What arrogance!" The aliens leaned closer, waiting for the moment he made a fool of himself. Some already imagined the clumsy sound he would make, and their smiles grew wider. To them, this was not a challenge, but a guaranteed failure. The human stopped in front of the Xenotone. For a brief moment, he simply looked at it, studying its design, the strings that shimmered like water, the frame that held an ancient elegance. He lifted his hand slowly, and the hall grew quieter. Even the laughter began to fade, curiosity mixing with their arrogance. They wanted to see what he would do. He placed his fingers gently on the strings. The crystal surface was cool under his touch, and the faint hum of the instrument vibrated against his skin. For the aliens, this moment was a game. For the human, it was something else. He remembered his world, his people, and the long journey that had brought him here. His chest rose with a slow breath, and his eyes closed, shutting out the sea of mocking faces. The silence stretched longer than expected. Some aliens grew impatient, shifting in their seats. One shouted, "Play, human, or are you too afraid?" Another laughed and added, "Perhaps he doesn't even know how to hold it." Laughter rippled again, but weaker this time, as all eyes stayed fixed on the man standing so still with the glowing instrument. Then something changed in the air. It was not sound yet, but a feeling, a weight of expectation. The human's fingers tightened slightly on the strings. His expression was calm, his posture strong. It was the look of someone who was not here to play their game, but to show them something they did not understand. The queen leaned forward, her laughter gone, her eyes narrowing as if she sensed something unusual. The nobles exchanged looks, their earlier amusement faltering, though none would admit it. At that moment, the human opened his eyes. They were steady, almost burning with quiet fire. He looked across the hall, not with fear, but with a strange kind of challenge, as if he was no longer the one being mocked, but the one daring them to listen. His hands shifted across the glowing strings, and the first faint vibration stirred, not yet music, but the promise of it. A hush spread through the crowd. Even those who wanted to laugh found their voices caught in their throats. Something in his calmness, in the way he touched the Xenotone, was different from what they expected. This was not the trembling of a fool. This was the beginning of something none of them had imagined. And as his fingers pressed down, preparing to strike the first true note, the hall held its breath. The human was ready. The moment of mockery was over. The moment of revelation was about to begin. The human's fingers moved slowly across the glowing strings, and the first sound finally came. It was soft, almost like a whisper, but it carried through the vast hall as if the walls themselves leaned forward to hear. The note was gentle, but it cut through the air, silencing even the last whispers of laughter. The aliens blinked, their faces frozen, unsure if what they had just heard was real. They had expected noise, something ugly, something that would make the entire hall roar with cruel laughter. But what came was beautiful, delicate, and strangely powerful. The sound was not like their usual music, which was sharp, proud, and loud. This sound had warmth in it, a sadness that pulled at the heart. Even those who hated humans felt their chests tighten, though they did not understand why. The human did not look at them. His eyes were closed, his head slightly bowed, as if he was speaking with the instrument, not the crowd. His hands moved again, and another note joined the first. Then another, and another, forming a slow rhythm like footsteps on a lonely road. The sound grew stronger, weaving into a melody that filled the space with emotion. The hall that once echoed with laughter was now wrapped in silence. Some aliens leaned forward, their eyes narrowing, trying to understand. A warrior with scars across his face frowned deeply. "This cannot be," he muttered under his breath. A noble woman beside him, her golden eyes wide, whispered, "The Xenotone. It has never sounded like this before." She clutched her robes as if the sound had touched something inside her she had long forgotten. The human's fingers danced with care. He did not force the strings. He touched them as though he respected them, as though each note mattered. And the Xenotone responded. Its glow grew brighter, pulsing with the rhythm of his playing. The shimmering light spread across the hall, reflecting on the crystal walls, bathing everyone in its glow. Some aliens felt goosebumps rise on their skin. Others found themselves holding their breath without realizing it. The queen, who had once laughed, now sat completely still. Her jeweled crown sparkled in the shifting light, but her eyes were fixed on the man standing before the crowd. She had heard music all her life, songs of victory, songs of pride, songs of tradition. But she had never heard this. It was not the sound of power. It was the sound of something deeper, something she could not name. The nobles who had shouted mockery minutes ago now sat silently, their mocking smiles fading. A few exchanged nervous glances, but none dared speak. The human's music was not loud, not grand, yet it carried more weight than the strongest voice. Every note seemed to reach into the heart, pulling memories, stirring emotions they thought they no longer had. The melody shifted. What had begun as soft and sorrowful grew richer, deeper. The human's fingers moved faster, not wildly, but with purpose. The sound told a story, though no words were spoken. The aliens began to see pictures in their minds, flashes of a blue sky, a green field, a child laughing, a soldier standing alone in the rain. These were not their memories, yet the music painted them so clearly they felt as if they had lived them. Some tried to resist. A tall noble with red skin clenched his fists, shaking his head as if to fight against the feelings rising in his chest. But when the human struck a deep note, even he felt his throat tighten. Another warrior, who had once called humans weak, turned his face slightly, ashamed that his eyes were beginning to water. The hall was changing. What had once been filled with arrogance was now filled with something they had no word for. The sound did not command respect like a sword. It did not demand fear like a battle. Instead, it opened doors inside them that had been locked for generations. The Xenotone glowed brighter still, almost alive in his hands. Its strings shone with shifting colors, blue, green, gold, matching the waves of sound flowing into the hall. The human played with no sign of struggle, as if he had been born for this moment. He was not just playing an alien instrument, he was speaking with it and through it to everyone watching. Children of the nobles, who had been restless and noisy, were now sitting quietly on their seats, eyes wide and unblinking. One little alien girl clutched her father's hand and whispered, "Why does it feel like I want to cry?" Her father had no answer. He could only stare at the human, his own heart heavy with emotions he had buried long ago. The queen's lips parted slightly as the melody shifted again, softer now, like the voice of a mother humming to her child. The notes wrapped around the room gently, tenderly, as though comforting every soul inside. The cruel laughter that once echoed in the chamber seemed like a memory from another world. No one dared laugh now. No one dared speak. The human's face showed no pride, no arrogance. He was not trying to prove them wrong. He was simply letting the music flow, letting his heart guide the strings. And that made it even more powerful. Every alien in the room realized, perhaps for the first time, that this human was not weak. He carried something they did not, something invisible, yet stronger than their pride. One by one, the nobles who had mocked him began to lower their heads, as if ashamed of their earlier words. The hall was heavy with emotion, but no one moved to stop him. No one wanted the music to end. And as the melody rose higher, trembling with both sorrow and beauty, the truth became clear. What they thought would be a moment of humiliation was becoming a moment they would never forget. The human, once the object mockery, was now the center of their silence, the master of their hearts, and they could do nothing but listen. The melody began to change, deeper and heavier, as if the human was pulling something out from his very soul. His eyes were closed, his face calm, but inside his heart, memories rose like storms. The Xenotone carried those memories into sound, and each note reached the aliens in ways words never could. He remembered his childhood, running through green fields under the warm sun of his homeworld. He remembered laughter with friends, simple joys that now felt so far away. The strings sang of that happiness, soft and bright, and for a moment the aliens felt the warmth of a world they had never seen. They saw in their minds a blue sky with white clouds, the sound of children laughing, the comfort of a family meal. It was not their life, not their memories, yet the music painted it so clearly that they felt it as if it was their own. But then the melody shifted. The notes grew sharp, heavy, and full of weight. The human's mind drifted to the war, to battles that tore his world apart. He remembered fire on the horizon, the smell of smoke, and the cries of those he could not save. His hands trembled slightly as the memories pressed against his chest, but he did not stop. He let the Xenotone cry for him. The sound echoed like thunder, low and broken, like the sobs of a wounded soul. The aliens felt it. They saw flashes in their minds, burning buildings, soldiers falling, families running in fear. Their throats tightened as if they had lived it themselves. Many of them had fought wars, had seen death, but never had they felt the raw emotion of loss so clearly. Some shifted in their seats, their pride cracking as the notes pierced deeper. One warrior, tall and scarred, placed a hand on his chest as if something inside him hurt. He whispered, "Why do I see his pain?" But no one answered, for they too felt the same. A noble woman, her jewels glittering in the Xenotone's glow, covered her mouth with her hand, tears forming in her golden eyes. She had never cried in public, yet now she could not stop it. The music softened again, carrying sorrow but also something more, a faint light hidden inside the darkness. The human remembered moments of courage, the times he and his people stood together even when everything was falling apart. He remembered holding a friend's hand as they promised not to give up. Remembered soldiers standing in the rain, refusing to bow even as defeat surrounded them. The notes grew steady, like footsteps marching forward, slow but unyielding. The aliens felt the change. Their hearts, heavy with grief a moment ago, now felt a spark of strength. The music carried both pain and hope, bound together. Some of them closed their eyes, their minds filled with images of standing against impossible odds, refusing to break. It stirred something inside them that their own music never touched. Their songs were about victory, pride, and power. This music was about survival, about refusing to surrender even when broken. The Xenotone glowed brighter as if it too was alive, responding to the human's soul. Its light washed over the hall, touching every corner, leaving no one untouched. Even the queen, who had ruled with cold pride, leaned forward in her throne, her lips pressed tightly together, her eyes fixed on him. She felt her chest ache in a way she had never known before. The melody wove between sorrow and strength, grief and courage. It was a story told without words, but the meaning was clear. The human was not playing for glory or to impress them. He was playing his life, his memories, his truth. The aliens who had once mocked him now found themselves unable to look away. Every note revealed a part of him they had never understood. And in those notes, they saw humanity in a way they never had before. One child in the audience, small and curious, whispered softly, "Why does his music hurt, but also make me feel strong?" Her mother, a proud noblewoman, had no answer. She only pulled her daughter closer, her own tears falling silently as the melody continued to weave through her heart. The hall was silent except for the sound of the Xenotone. No one dared to interrupt. The human was no longer just a guest in their court, no longer a subject of laughter. He had become a voice that none of them could ignore. His music was breaking walls, walls of arrogance, walls of hate, walls built over generations. The sorrowful notes carried guilt into their hearts. Many aliens shifted uncomfortably, remembering the way they had mocked him only moments ago. They realized that this so-called weak human carried more strength than they could see. Not strength of body, not strength of war, but strength of spirit, a strength that could reach them even through sound. The queen's hand, covered in rings of gold and gems, trembled slightly as she rested it on the armrest of her throne. For the first time in her long reign, she felt powerless, not because of an enemy's blade, but because of a human's music. It stripped away her defenses and left her heart bare, and she could not hide from it. The human's fingers moved gracefully, his face calm, though his heart was burning with memory. He remembered his losses, but he also remembered his love for his people, his friends, his home. And that love sang through the Xenotone, filling the hall with an ache so beautiful that many aliens wept openly. Their tears sparkled in the glow of the instrument, but no one dared to wipe them away. To do so would feel like denying the truth of what they were hearing. The melody slowed, softer again, carrying the weight of all he had shared. It was not just music anymore. It was a bridge between species, a voice that said, "This is who we are. This is what it means to be human." And as the last few notes of this part hung in the air, the aliens sat frozen, their hearts heavy and full, waiting for what would come next, knowing they could never laugh at him again. The music grew heavier, every note pressing deep into the hearts of those who listened. The alien nobles, who once sat tall with pride, now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Their faces, once full of smug smiles, had grown serious. The sound of the Xenotone was not just entering their ears, it was entering their souls. It tore away the armor of arrogance they had worn all their lives. A warrior with golden armor, who had earlier laughed the loudest, now clenched his jaw tightly. His strong hands, used to holding a blade, trembled slightly on the table. He had fought many battles, heard screams and cries of enemies, but never had he felt something like this. A single note from a human's hands had broken through his pride like no sword ever could. Across the hall, a noblewoman with long silver hair wiped her eyes quickly, hoping no one saw. Her kind was known for never showing weakness in public, yet the music was too strong. Each note carried sorrow that she could not block. She pressed her jeweled fingers against her lips, trying to hide the trembling of her breath. The Xenotone was forcing her to feel, and she hated it, but she could not stop it. The queen herself, who sat high on her golden throne, leaned forward. Her crown glittered under the glowing light of the instrument, but her eyes were fixed only on the human. She had mocked him at the beginning. She had thought his attempt would end in shame. But now, as the music rose higher, her chest felt tight. She placed her hand gently against her heart, almost without realizing it. She whispered to herself, "How can this be?" Her voice was low, but the attendants near her heard the tremble in it. The nobles began to whisper among themselves, but their voices were hushed, almost fearful. "He should not know these notes," one said, his eyes wide. "The Xenotone was never meant for his kind," another added, but even as they spoke, their words had no strength. Deep inside, they knew what they were hearing was real, and no denial could change it. The human's face was calm. He was not looking for approval, not waiting for their praise. His eyes were still closed, his hands moving with grace across the glowing strings. The sound flowed like water, rising and falling, weaving sadness with hope. He played not for them, but for the truth inside him, and that truth was now breaking their walls. One scarred general, known for never bowing his head, lowered his gaze to the ground. He felt shame burning in his chest. He had called humans weak, unworthy, and fragile. Yet here was one human, unarmed, surrounded by hundreds of aliens, holding nothing but an instrument, and he had conquered them all. Not with violence, but with music. The tension in the hall grew stronger with every passing moment. The music pulled at memories the aliens had buried long ago. Some remembered battles they had fought, victories that once filled them with pride. But now, under the human song, those victories tasted bitter. They remembered the faces of those who had died, the voices of those who never came home. For the first time, they understood the weight of their own actions. Tears began to fall more openly. A noble tried to hide his face with his sleeve, but his shoulders shook. A warrior pressed his fist against his chest, but the sound still broke him. Servants at the back of the hall stood frozen, their eyes wet, afraid to move, but unable to stop their tears. Even the guards, who had been trained to show no emotion, stood stiff, their throats tight. The queen's eyes glistened, though she tried to remain still. She was a ruler, a symbol of strength to her people, yet she could not deny the ache inside her heart. She thought of the lives she had ordered into war, the sacrifices she had demanded, and suddenly those decisions felt heavier than the crown on her head. The music was not only breaking the pride of her nobles, it was breaking her own. And still, the human played on. His fingers did not falter, his breath steady, his body calm. He looked fragile compared to them, but the strength of his spirit filled the hall like a storm. He was not asking for their respect, but they gave it silently, helplessly, without realizing it. The whispers grew again, but now they carried no mockery. They carried fear, awe, and confusion. "This is impossible," one noble said, clutching the edge of the table. "No human should hold such power." Another, her voice trembling, whispered, "It is not power, it is truth." The music rose, reaching a peak that sent chills down every spine. The Xenotone's glow spread across the hall, touching the walls, the ceiling, even the floor beneath their feet. It was as if the very building breathed with the sound. Every alien in that room felt small, as though they were standing before something greater than themselves. The queen finally whispered the words none expected to hear. "We were wrong." Her voice was low, meant only for herself, but in the silence, many heard her. They looked at her, then back at the human, and for the first time, the nobles who once sat high with pride now felt humbled. The hall, once filled with arrogant laughter, was now filled with quiet weeping and heavy silence. The sound of the Xenotone was the only voice left, and it was enough to crush the pride of an entire people. The mockery was gone. What replaced it was respect, fear, and something deeper, an understanding that this human had given them a gift they did not deserve. And as the melody softened once more, leaving them trembling in their seats, they knew the truth. Their arrogance had been shattered, and nothing would ever be the same again. The music did not stop. It grew deeper, stronger, carrying emotions that no alien language could express. The human's fingers moved smoothly across the glowing strings, and the Xenotone answered him as if it was alive. The sound rose and fell like waves, sometimes soft as a whisper, sometimes powerful as thunder. It was no longer just music. It was a story, and every alien in the hall was forced to listen. The story was filled with sorrow. The human remembered the faces he had lost, the homes burned in war, the friends buried far away. Each note carried that pain, and the hall felt it. The aliens saw visions in their minds, cities turned to ash, children crying for parents who never returned, soldiers falling with their weapons still in their hands. The music made their hearts ache, heavy and tight, as if they themselves had walked through those broken streets. But in the middle of sorrow came another sound, a sound of hope. The human's hands changed the rhythm, making the music rise like a sunrise after a long night. The notes carried light, fragile but unbroken. They spoke of courage, of people who stood together even when the world seemed lost. The aliens saw new visions, a soldier standing firm against impossible odds, a mother holding her child close, a boy planting a tree in the ruins of a city. These images burned into their minds, and they could not look away. Some aliens covered their faces with their hands, their bodies shaking with tears. Others stared forward with wet eyes, their pride shattered. They had always thought humans were weak creatures, ruled by fear, unworthy of respect. But now they saw the truth in sound. Humans carried pain, but they also carried hope. They did not bow to despair. They turned sorrow into strength, wounds into songs. The queen, sitting on her golden throne, felt her chest ache more with every note. She had laughed at him, mocked him, and ordered him to play for amusement. But now she felt small before him. Her eyes were wet and her lips trembled. She whispered softly to herself, "He is not weak. No, he is stronger than all of us." Those near her heard the words but could not respond. They were too lost in the music. The Xenotone glowed brighter and brighter, pulsing with each note. Its light touched the walls, the floor, and every alien in the hall. It was as if the instrument had chosen him, as if it wanted his hands to speak truths that no alien dared to hear. And the humans' truths were clear. Life was pain, but also love. Loss was heavy, but hope never died. The hall was filled with silent weeping. The proud nobles who had once laughed now wiped tears they could not stop. Even hardened warriors who had faced death without fear now bowed their heads, ashamed of their earlier arrogance. A young alien child whispered to her mother, "Why do I feel like my heart is breaking and healing at the same time?" The mother had no answer. She only hugged her child closer and let her tears fall. The melody grew stronger still, carrying both sorrow and hope at once. It was like a river flowing with two currents, one of grief and one of light. The aliens had never heard such music before. Their own songs were filled with pride, victory, and glory. But this music was different. It was about loss, survival, and love. It was about being broken and still standing tall. The human's face remained calm, but his heart was burning. He remembered every loss, every face, every moment of despair. But he also remembered holding hands with those he loved, remembering their laughter, remembering the times they chose hope instead of giving up. All of this poured into the Xenotone, and the aliens felt every piece of it. A scarred general wiped his eyes roughly, his voice cracking as he whispered, This is what makes them dangerous. Not their weapons, not their armies. This." He pressed his hand against his chest, feeling the ache the music had left. Another noble beside him nodded silently, unable to speak through his tears. The queen lowered her head slightly, her crown catching the glow of the Xenotone. Her tears rolled down her cheeks freely now. She had never cried before her court, but the music had torn away her mask. For the first time, she saw humanity not as fragile creatures, but as something far greater. They were survivors. They were dreamers. They were beings who carried light even in the darkest night. The song reached its peak, filling the hall with waves of emotion. The sound seemed endless, wrapping around every listener, holding them close like an embrace. No one dared to move. No one dared to speak. The hall that had once roared with mocking laughter was now drowning in silent tears. Then the music softened again, fading like the last light of day. The human's fingers slowed, his body still calm, his eyes still closed. The Xenotone's glow dimmed slightly, but the silence in the hall remained heavy. The aliens could still feel the song inside them, echoing in their hearts like a memory they would never lose. What had begun as mockery had become something holy. The nobles no longer saw him as an outsider, no longer as a weak human. They saw him as something they did not understand but could not deny. His music had reached places no weapon, no law, no crown could ever touch. And as the final notes faded into silence, every alien in the hall sat frozen in awe. Their tears glistened under the crystal lights, their hearts trembling. The human lowered his hands, and the Xenotone grew quiet. But the echoes of his song remained in every soul present. They knew they had been changed forever, and nothing could erase what they had just felt. The sound of the Xenotone carried through every corner of the hall, soft yet powerful, and no one dared to break the silence. The human's hands moved gracefully, drawing out notes that wrapped around every listener like invisible chains. The toughest warriors, men and women who had once stood fearless on battlefields, now sat with wet eyes. Their bodies were strong, their wills unbroken in war. But here, in this hall, a single human with an instrument had made them feel weak. Tears ran down scarred faces. Some tried to hide them, but the effort was useless. The sound was too raw, too real. Each note opened a wound inside and at the same time healed it with something tender. The human's music was not only sorrowful, it was full of love, of memory, of something the aliens could not describe. They had never known music could do this. Their own songs were filled with pride and power, always showing strength, never weakness. But this was different. This music carried truth. The queen could no longer sit still. She rose slowly from her golden throne, her jeweled crown shining in the Xenotone's glow. Her eyes, sharp and proud when the night began, were now wet with tears she could not hold back. Every movement of the human's fingers pressed deeper into her soul. She had ruled her people with power and fear, but never with this. She whispered softly, her voice trembling, "This is strength." The guards standing near her shifted uneasily, for they had never heard weakness in her voice before. Around the hall, nobles wiped their faces with their sleeves, ashamed of their tears, yet unable to stop them. Some of them had mocked the human the loudest. They had laughed, pointed, and called him weak, but now they could not even meet his eyes. The music had stripped them bare. Their arrogance felt like a hollow shell, and they hated the memory of their own laughter. The Xenotone glowed brighter, its light spreading across the hall like a second sun. Its sound was no longer just heard, it was felt. Every chest carried its weight. Every breath matched its rhythm. The hall seemed to pulse with the music, as if the very walls and floor had become part of the song. Servants at the edges stood frozen, tears running freely. Even the guards who had sworn to stand stiff and unbroken now blinked rapidly, their faces wet. The human did not open his eyes. He was lost in the song, playing from the depth of his soul. He was not trying to conquer them. He was not trying to impress them. He was simply playing the truth of what it meant to live, to lose, to love, to hope. That truth was more powerful than any sword or crown. A scarred general stood suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. He was known for his cruelty, feared even by his own people. His chest heaved, his face twisted, but not in anger. Tears rolled down his cheeks, and his voice cracked as he shouted, "Enough! I cannot take it anymore!" Yet even as he said the words, he did not leave. His legs shook, his fists clenched, but he stayed rooted in place, as though some part of him begged for more. The hall gasped at his outburst, but no one judged him, for they felt the same. The queen stepped down from her throne, her long robe flowing behind her as she walked toward the human. Every eye followed her, the hall holding its breath. She stopped only a few steps away from him. The Xenotone's light reflected on her face, showing the tears rolling down her cheeks. She had never bowed to anyone, never lowered herself in front of her court. But as the music filled her, she whispered, "Forgive us." The word broke the silence, and shock rippled through the hall. The human still did not open his eyes, but his music answered her. It grew softer, gentler, like a hand resting on a wounded heart. It was not forgiveness spoken in words, but given in sound. The aliens felt it. The song told them that though they had mocked him, though they had treated him as less, he still shared his soul with them. He still gave them beauty when they had given him cruelty. And that truth struck them harder than any insult could. All around, nobles began to stand, some covering their faces, others bowing their heads. They were overwhelmed, not by force, but by something far stronger. The music had made them see themselves clearly, and they could no longer hide behind pride. A warrior fell to his knees, sobbing openly. A noblewoman leaned on the shoulder of her husband, her body shaking with tears. None of them cared for appearances anymore. The hall, once a place of laughter and arrogance, was now a place of surrender. Not surrender in battle, but surrender of the heart. Every alien there had been broken and rebuilt by the song. They looked at the human not as prey, not as weak, but as something greater, something they could not define, but that demanded respect. The queen bowed her head slightly, her voice carrying across the hall. "No blade has ever done this. No army has ever made us feel this way. You, a human, have conquered us with music." Her words hung in the air, heavy with truth. No one argued, no one could. And still, the human played on. His fingers did not falter, his face calm, his body steady. The Xenotone's light dimmed and brightened with each note, as though breathing with him. The hall was in tears, but not in shame. They were tears of awakening, tears of realizing something far beyond their understanding. By now, no alien saw him as small. No one saw him as weak. He had touched their souls, something none of them had ever experienced. The mocking voices were gone, replaced by quiet hearts that would never forget this night. The music slowed, gentle as a final breath, carrying them toward the end of the song. The aliens sat still, unwilling to move, unwilling to let the moment pass. They were bound by the truth of his music, and they knew their world had changed forever. The music softened, the human's fingers slowing as if he was letting go of something heavy. The Xenotone glowed faintly, no longer pulsing like a storm, but shining like a quiet flame. The last notes floated into the air, gentle and fragile, before fading into silence. The hall that had once roared with laughter was now still, so quiet that even a breath sounded loud. Every alien in the room sat frozen, their hearts pounding, their eyes wet. The human lowered his hands slowly from the strings. His shoulders rose and fell with a calm breath, but his face showed no pride, no arrogance. He opened his eyes at last, and they were steady, calm, as if he had given them everything he carried inside. He did not bow. He did not speak. He simply stood, waiting, his silence heavier than words. The hall did not know how to react. Nobles who had mocked him looked down at the floor, ashamed to meet his gaze. Warriors who had once boasted of their strength now felt small, their spirits shaken. Servants and guards who had never dared to feel in front of their rulers now stood with wet cheeks, their tears glowing in the soft light. The music had ended, but its echo lived inside each of them, beating in their hearts like an unending rhythm. The queen was the first to move. She stood, her crown shining under the crystal lights, her face wet with tears that still rolled down her cheeks. She had mocked him the loudest at the beginning, but now she could not even meet his eyes. She stepped forward slowly, her robe brushing the floor as the hall watched in silence. When she stopped only a few steps away from him, she lowered her head. Her voice, soft but trembling, broke the silence. "We asked you to fail. Instead, you gave us truth." The words carried through the hall like a flame. Whispers rose, but they carried no mockery this time. They carried awe, respect, and something else, fear. Fear not of the human's body, but of his spirit. No one there could deny what they had felt. The music had stripped them bare, showing them what it meant to be alive, what it meant to suffer, and what it meant to hope. And they had no defense against it. One noble fell to his knees, his proud voice breaking as he said, "Forgive us." Another followed, his head bowed low. Soon, one by one, more began to rise from their seats, stepping forward or lowering themselves in silent honor. They had mocked him as weak, but now they stood before him with humility, unable to see him as anything less than great. The warriors, once proud and fierce, pressed their fists against their chests in salute. It was the gesture of respect, normally reserved only for their greatest leaders. Yet tonight, they gave it to him. A human who carried no weapon, who had fought no battle, but who had conquered them with sound alone. Their hearts were his, and they knew it. The queen raised her head at last, her voice steadier now, though still filled with emotion. This hall was filled with pride, she said, her eyes moving across her nobles. And tonight, it has been broken by one man, a man we called lesser, a man we mocked, and yet he has done what none of us could. Her gaze returned to the human, and she whispered, "You are no longer a guest. You are our teacher." The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. No one argued. No one laughed. Even the youngest in the hall, children of nobles who had grown up hearing that humans were weak, now looked at him with wide eyes filled with respect. They would never forget this night. The human did not smile. He did not speak. His eyes looked across the hall, meeting theirs one by one. He saw their tears, their bowed heads, their broken pride. He had given them his heart, and they had received it. That was enough. With quiet steps, he placed the Xenotone back on its stand. Its glow dimmed, returning to stillness, as if it too was resting after the song. When he turned to leave, the hall remained silent. No one dared to stop him. No one dared to speak. They only watched, their breaths held, as he walked toward the great doors. Each step echoed in the quiet chamber, carrying more weight than 1,000 speeches. As he reached the doors, something unexpected happened. The queen, ruler of them all, dropped to her knees. The sound of her robe brushing against the floor broke the silence, and gasps filled the hall. Never before had she bowed to anyone. Yet here she was, head lowered, voice trembling as she whispered, "You have my respect. You have all of ours." The nobles followed her. One by one, they fell to their knees, some openly sobbing, others silent but humbled. The warriors pressed their fists tighter to their chests, bowing their heads. The hall of arrogance had become a hall of honor, and it was all because of him. The human paused at the doors. He looked back once, his face calm, his eyes steady. He did not thank them. He did not scold them. He simply gave them a final look, one that carried the message they would never forget. Humanity was not weak. Humanity carried sorrow, love, and hope deeper than any blade or crown. Then he turned and walked out, leaving the hall in stunned silence. The music was gone, but the memory of it stayed. The aliens sat still long after he had left, their hearts heavy and their minds restless. They knew the world had changed. They knew they could never again call humans weak, for tonight they had witnessed a strength that no war could defeat. And so, what began with mockery ended in tears. What began with arrogance ended in humility. And the story of one human and one song would live forever in their hearts. A reminder that sometimes the greatest power is not in armies or weapons, but in the truth carried by a single soul.